Hello, my name is Ethan. I'm a New York-based organization development coach, and I work with mostly for-profit organizations to help them on two fronts, to help them to unleash their employees' untapped potential to increase performance and productivity, thus positively impacting their profitability, and also helping organizations to create world-class cultures. So today's video is on a specific industry, banks and financial services firms. Why? Well, to start off with, I spent about half of my 20 years in corporate America working in banking and financial services. So I had a bird's eye view to certain organizational behaviors. I also, as a coach, have worked with quite a few banks and financial services firms. And also, as a teacher, I've taught in 10 colleges and universities. Quite a few of my students went into banking and financial services. So I want to shine a light today on the industry and give people an insight into what I think are behaviors that are representative in banks and financial services firms, and to what extent they can think about organizational behavior modification to create better workplace cultures. So let's start out today with a little bit of a deep dive into some various sources. So July 28th, 2014, so going back pretty much 11 years ago, Bill Rhodes, a former senior executive of Citibank and author of a book, Banker to the World, The Challenges of Culture, Conduct, and Reputation. So it's almost unanimously agreed that changes need to be made to improve the banking culture. But it's important to set realistic and workable targets that support the banking business model. Why do I think that that's kind of an interesting comment? Because the fundamental truism of banking and financial services, it's predicated on a model which doesn't really think about ethics or a moral compass. It's based on a transaction. It's the deal. It's not about employees. Employees are perceived to be assets that are fundamentally instrumental in helping these organizations generate revenue. That's what it's about. As an employee who maybe spent a significant part of her or their career in banking or financial services, the attitude of new people coming in, junior associates, is, I went through it. You should have to deal with that as well. As I said, it's all about money. And another mindset is, well, if you're new to the industry, and I had a lot of my students share with me, they spend a few years in banking and financial services, they leave. Well, if the prevailing model is built on churn and burn, of course we're going to typically work you 75 hours a week for associates, because you're only going to be here for a few years, which means why should we invest in you, care about you, worry about you, solicit your input, and care about your feelings or how you're doing? It's rhetorical. They don't. Everyone's stressed. Everyone's overworked, everyone's exhausted. And so given that kind of construct, of course, there's going to be rampant, horrible, horrible management. So that's why I think it's interesting that Bill Rhodes kind of starts out with that. We need to, again, think about improvement to the banking culture, but setting realistic and workable targets that support a banking business model. Well, what are realistic? What are realistic changes in ethical behavior? The scale of bank regulatory reform in recent years has been unprecedented, so going back to 2014. Yet public confidence in banks in the US and Western Europe remain unsatisfactory. This weakens internal morale of the employees in these organizations, especially in banks, while damaging the ability of some institutions to maximize their contributions to financial intermediation and economic growth. So at the end of the day, what does that mean? It's a self-vetting talent acquisition funnel, meaning people who are predisposed to want to go into the profession for any reason except money, that's gone. So what you're going to have is really smart people, very talented, but in the pursuit of money, they're going to go into banking and financial services. They focus on salary and bonuses and moving up the organizational corporate ladder. That's their focus. And so it's a refueling of institutionalized lacking of empathy. So this is what I think is important to focus on. So what if banks implemented a code of conduct, a culture code, meaning they set guiding principles documented that they use in every aspect of their human resources stage of the employee life cycle with them, from recruiting to interviewing, onboarding, orientation, through to people's career and professional development, all the way to the point at which they leave the organization. There's a fundamental documented code of conduct which employees are taught, trained, coached, motivated to follow. And a good culture underpins and is reflected by the actions of a company's employees. Problematic culture will also be reflected in how a firm and its employees perform. Look, we remember what happened in 2007, 2008 in the banking recession. Banks, financial services firms stole from their customers. They lied to their customers. They lied to federal regulators. They overworked and treated their employees horribly. That was 2007 to 2009. We saw organizations deemed too big to fail, with hundreds of thousands of them fail. Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, Merrill, AIG. We saw this over and over again, right? So it's interesting because he goes on to say the risk management component of creating good culture always poses challenges for financial institutions. So there's a lot of complexity around the interplay of the 4 different kinds of institutional risk in banks, financial services firms as well: credit risk, market risk, operational risk, and reputational risk. And all managers, all leaders, if they make serious mistakes in any of the first 3, credit risk, market risk, operational risk, that adversely or negatively impacts reputational risk. What happens when people no longer trust banks? What happens? So I want to share with you an organization who's doing yeoman work to shine a light on organizations. It's called PIS Consumer. And if you haven't heard of them, I'm going to put the link to all of these resources down below, but check them out. It's fascinating. They do research into how customers feel they're being treated. So you know me, if you've watched any of my videos, I talk a lot about employees as a primary stakeholder. But don't forget, the second major stakeholder that organizations interact with is their customer base. So going back to December of 2024, so this was just like 3 weeks ago, Rebecca Garland, who's a business and education expert, wrote on behalf of PIS Consumer, the worst and best banks according to customer research. Consumer issues that were research reported to PIS Consumer tell us that all banks are not equal, with so many options and so many disappointing reviews about those options online. We dug into the feedback to find the best banks for customers and the worst. Now, if you want, in this link, go research all of them. But I'm just going to show a little bit of how organizations who have lacking cultures, it comes out. It comes out in how you treat your employees, how they perform, and how you treat your customers. So there are currently 4,470 FDIC insured commercial banks in the US. Only 16% of customers are willing to pay account transaction fees at a bank, even if the service is good. And 9 out of 10 customers are happy with their current bank. Now, this blows my mind. Okay, this blows my mind. But let's dive into some of the organizations that I want to shine the spotlight on who weren't stellar examples. So let's start with PNC Bank. In the spirit of full disclosure, please note at one point in the past, they were my business bank. PNC's rating, as based on 871 customer reviews, on a scale of 1 to 5, was a 1.4. On a scale of 1 to 5. Headquartered in Pittsburgh, PA, earning $21 billion in 2022. The bank offers a range of services, And I want to talk to you about what the summarized results of these 871 customer reviews were for PNC Bank. 91% of those reviews are negative. Those reviews have left the company with a 1.4 on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. Currently, only 17% of reviewers would recommend PNC Bank to a friend or colleague. Similarly, PNC Bank customer service also only earned a 1.4 rating on a 5-star scale. So customers complain that PNC will not fix mistakes. The company overall is difficult to work with, even if some branch employees are friendly. Some customers find the opposite to be true, for sure, certainly, with corporate offices being more helpful than the local branches. Okay, but understand that if you're just trying to research organizations, you may go to some of the more popular employee or customer review sites, Indeed, Glassdoor, LinkedIn. So let's go to a different way of looking at PNC. So we go to Glassdoor, we look at PNC Bank. They've got 9,575 reviews with an average review on a 1 to 5 star scale of a 3.5. With 65% of people, employees, thinking favorably of CEO Bill Demchak. Okay, so if you look at what people are saying, if you look at reviews from a demographic perspective, you see that it varies. Asian employees, 184, gave it a 4.0. But Indigenous Americans, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, anywhere from a 2.8 to a 3.4. And the rest are in between in kind of that B- range of 3.3 to 3.7 stars on a 1 to 5 scale. So again, depending on what the resource or source is for your information, and depending on how you're looking at banks in terms of employees or customers, there's a wide scope of performance in terms of culture. So I want to go back. I'm not just picking on PNC, I promise. You look at things like Synchrony Bank, 1.4 rating on a 1 to 5 star scale, 1,357 reviews. Synchrony Bank was a total of 1,357 online reviews from customers. This is not good. 90% of the reviews for Synchrony Bank are negative. 35% of customers would recommend Synchrony Bank to a friend or family member. Top customer complaints. Customers complain about issues primarily with Synchrony Bank credit cards and customer service. Look, the easiest way to destroy an organization's reputational brand is horrible customer service. As many of you know, I shine a light at great organizations like Patagonia, like Zappos, like DuPont and Gore and Wegmans. I shine a light on organizations who have great culture. There seems to be institutionalized failures when it comes to the entire industry of banking and financial services. It's just problematic across the board. So let's go to Fortune, best workplaces in financial services and insurance. So I'm shifting a little bit from banks to financial services firms, and I kind of focused on a few really lacking banks. But in terms of financial services, let's look at some of the best. We know from Forbes list, reported on Great Place to Work, places like American Express, phenomenal. American Express is one of the most stellar cultures where people end up talented people who share the ethics and values of American Express's workforce. Synchrony Bank, I find this interesting. So again, we have a dichotomy. You can't always trust one perceived authoritative resource tool. You have to look at multiple. Pinnacle Bank, Capital One, Nationwide, Intuit. These are well-respected global organizations that have built amazing cultures. Edward Jones, Bank of America. In spirit of full disclosure, Bank of America is currently on my consumer. They're my consumer bank. But anybody who's worked with a bank or financial services firm, you almost come to expect shabby treatment as an employee, maybe, and definitely as a client. And you just kind of chalk it up to that's just part of what the deal is. And it's unfortunate. It really is. So, I want to go back to Bill Rhodes in Banker magazine, his article, The Challenges of Culture, Conduct, and Reputation. And I told you before that he believed the recommendation is to start a culture code in these banks and financial services firm. I mentioned the challenge of the 4 areas of risk. And so these perceptions of banks and financial services firms have changed over the last 9 months. So going back to 2014, in a series of discussions between bankers and government officials around a report published by the Group of 30 in October 2013, a new paradigm, financial institutions, boards, and supervisors, member of the Financial Stability Board, encouraged the development of a report, of a culture report. And they have recently supported the idea that the G30 consider writing a follow-up study on banking culture and conduct. What's been done since 2014? Well, we're in January of 2025. And how do people feel about banks and financial services firms now? I'll leave that up to you. I'll leave it up to you to determine that. But I want to move now into investment banking. And this is a really interesting article that appeared on Peak Frameworks. So the author Matt Ting, I want to read some of this. Investment banking is an extremely intense and laborious industry. It's very common to work 75 hours a week in investment banking because it's the culture there and it's what's expected of you. If you're in a top performing group in investment bank, you'll constantly be on live deals that require lots of weekend work and late nights. It's part and parcel with what's expected of you. You're compensated as the trade-off highly lucrative compensation. So it's pretty common for people right out of college to be making $150,000 per year on buy-side roles. Absolutely. You'll easily earn over $150K as a new graduate. But there's the stigma associated with it. The culture sucks. It seems almost perplexing that culture could be so collectively bad across the entire investment banking industry, right? How is it possible? How is it possible? According to this author, I would argue that the structure of investment banks and the core investment banking business model are the primary contributors to bad culture. Most senior people don't actively get any joy out of torturing their people, but it's the demands of banking and investment banking business model that leads them to treat analysts horribly. So that's the point, right? That the culture struggles because it's the business model. It's the business model. That's the risk. So wrapping up today's video, this was not a deeper dive that I typically do into other industries or other trends or organizations, but I just wanted to shine the light on something. I've had a phenomenal number of highly gifted, highly talented college students, undergraduate and graduate, who've expressed to me concern about the concept or the option of going into banking and financial services after graduation. And I've seen it in people who I know personally in my social and professional networks who have been in those industries for years and decades. They're burnt out. They're struggling from a work-life, mental, physical wellness perspective. They don't see any viable career options or alternatives. They're accustomed to, in many cases, highly lucrative compensation. In other words, they sold their soul for the return of money. And that's why people go into banking and financial services. It's the salary, it's the bonus potential, it's the career mobility. And when you identify and define your career trajectory that way, that industry as a whole, banking and financial services, that's what you're left with. People who have that value construct, that moral compass, that's what it's all about. And those people who may be about other things, but might also be interested, they choose other careers. So that's what's going on. If you like this video, please feel free to certainly like it. It supports my work. Send me any comments you have. I'd love to know what they are. And also, if you found this video interesting, thought-provoking, maybe helpful, please be sure to subscribe. It really helps me out, grow this channel, and gives me a stronger megaphone to get these issues in front of more people. So thanks so much for coming in today and checking out the video, and I wish you much luck in your careers and your professional pursuits. Thank you.